The day the king came north, the wind had the sharpness of new-forged steel. Winterfell breathed in the cold and let it out in white plumes from the mouths of men and horses. The banners above the gatehouse cracked against the gray sky, direwolf and crowns taking their places as if the stones themselves watched the road. Jon stood on the inner wall walk with Ghost at his heel, the albino's red eyes alert. He watched the line of dust resolve into mailed riders and gilded wheels and long columns of men too richly dressed to belong to the north. The south came with them, a smear of color and heat and arrogance that made the chill feel cleaner by contrast. A horn sounded once, twice, and men gathered in the yard. Robb's grin was blade-bright and boyish, his hand ruffling gray wind's fur. Bran stalked restlessly along, half climbing the rails to see better, Arya with her hair escaping its ribbon, Sansa perfect as a painted figure, and Rickon frowning with the seriousness of the very small. Lady stood by Sansa like a story come to life. Catelyn, white at the throat despite her calm face, took her place beside Eddard. Maester Luwin was there too, smoothing the chain at his neck as if it itched him. Jon kept to the shadow of a Merlin. It was where he belonged, neither at the center nor hidden entirely. He could see everything from here. He could see the gold and green wheelhouse with antlers flaring from its corners like a boast. The bright green of the Tyrell rose on livery worn by men who had come north as part of the Queen's train, the Lannister crimson burning as if it had brought its own sun. He saw the King's ground ripple under the weight of 80 riders, the King's guard in white, and the great man himself, larger than the songs, beard gone to iron and belly to beer, but his laughter arrived first and rang like a promise. Robert Baratheon reined up so close to Eddard that the horses breathed the same mist. The king threw back his cloak and embraced Ned hard enough to make mail creak. Ghost shifted, watching, and Jon felt the old ache, sharp as the wind, that came whenever King Robert and his father stood so near. A man might think the past a room with its door shut. Then a voice in the yard opened it, and the old heir rushed out. "You've gotten thin," Robert said, and clapped Ned's shoulder again as if the blow could put flesh on it. "Does the North starve its lords now? Damn you, Stark. I've had to look at soft southern courtiers for too long. I need a hard face to remind me of when men were men." His gaze dropped to the direwolves gathered like living sigils, and he smiled in honest delight. "The gods have given you pups. My children will squeal." Cersei came in her gilded litter like a saint in a reliquary, and when she set her feet to the northern dirt, the yard grew a shade colder. Jaime Lannister turned his horse with a grace that would have gotten him killed in Winterfell had an arrow been loosed in earnest. It was pretty enough to be called dancing. His white cloak flowed over golden armor that fitted him like pride. Tyrion Lannister was not where a man looked first. He was where a man looked when he had looked everywhere else. But Jon's eye went to him as the dwarf slid from his saddle with more care than shame. Introductions spilled into the yard like wine. Names were exchanged, proprieties attended to. Jon felt himself invisible and then too visible as he always did. A contradiction he could never smooth out in himself. Ghost pressed his flank against Jon's leg, steadied him. He had sworn to himself to stand straight when the king came. He did. Robert's eyes, quick as a hawk's despite the bloat of wine and years, traveled the line of Stark children with interest, landed on Sansa with polite approval, paused on Arya with a flicker of amusement that might become indulgence or impatience, glanced over Bran and Rickon without true attention, then halted when they found Jon. For a heartbeat, the yard narrowed to those eyes and Jon's own breath. Robert frowned as if trying to place a face in a dream. Then the frown softened into something else Jon could not name. The king's thick fingers tapped the pommel of his sword once, twice. "That one," Robert said. Too low for the gathered courtiers, but not too low for a Stark's ears. He did not point.
"Ned?"
"My son," Ned said quietly. Cersei's lashes lifted.
"Asson?"
Her voice carried like a skater on clear ice. "I was not aware Lady Stark had borne the North so many heirs. Not a son of my marriage," Ned returned, stone in his tone, and Catelyn's hands tightened slightly in her sleeves. Jon held Robert's gaze for the space of a single winter breath and then looked no longer. He knew the shape of this. He had lived in the shape of this all his life. But the king's eyes had not been like other men's. Not contempt, not pity. Assessment. Jon swallowed. He did not know what to do with assessment. He found what to do later, when the feast turned the great hall crimson with firelight and full with noise. He sat far down the table among the men-at-arms and squires, Ghost stretched behind him like a pale moat between him and any who might stumble. Music flared and faltered. The boar arrived and was carved to oaths about the hunt. Robert ate the way he laughed. It was a consuming that drew eyes. The queen drank with careful mouthfuls and let her gaze do the swallowing. The king's children were a bright scatter. Joffrey all polished arrogance, Myrcella sweet as summer milk, Tommen nervous and trying to hide it. Joffrey's eyes slid over the wolves and onto Arya. They narrowed, dismissing. Sansa's eyes slid onto Joffrey and stayed there. Jon drank small beer and let the warmth of meat and fire sink through him. He told himself not to look toward the dais, and looked anyway. Robert was already leaning more toward Ned than toward his queen. He had a way of making even a stagger seem like intention. He stood, lifted a hand, and the hall eased toward silence like a great beast settling on its belly. Jon set down the trencher piece he'd been tearing absently. Ghost's ears pricked. "My lords," Robert began, and sounded suddenly like a king, not a man at a table. "And good people of the north, I have ridden too long on soft roads and tasted too little good meat. Tonight I eat salt at the table of my oldest friend. I have not come only to fill my belly and empty my cup. I have come to ask Lord Eddard Stark to be my hand." Like frost upon a pond at nightfall, a hush grew and spread. Jon felt something else under the hush, the way a hunter feels the forest lean to hear a twig break. He looked at Ned. The way his father's face had settled told Jon more than words. The North did not gasp, but men breathed out. "And," Robert said, and the word made Cersei's head tilt the smallest degree, "I have come to do justice to a memory that has haunted me longer than any man has a right to be haunted. Justice to a memory." Jon's skin went cold and then too hot. Catelyn's eyes closed, only for a moment, but they closed. Ned looked at his king with a fixed stillness that Jon would have known in the dark by the press of it. "Once, the dragons used to name a prince of Dragonstone," Robert said with a contempt that was almost fondness. "A title for their heir. They, dragons and their toys. After the rebellion, I made Dragonstone over to my brother. He has been a good caretaker, but a king may revive old names or bury them. He may take up what is useful and beat what is not into something that will hold a nail. Tonight I take up an old name and set it towards a new use." There was a shifting of silk and mail like the murmur of a distant sea. Tyrion Lannister's eyes glittered like coins. Jaime's mouth twitched as if to say, "Finally, something interesting." "In the presence of North and South," Robert said and lifted his cup high, "I proclaim Jon Snow of Winterfell, of Stark blood and northern steel, to be Prince of Dragonstone, my ward, and named in honor of a promise I made upon cold stone long ago. He shall be fostered where I will, and when he comes to manhood he shall be set over Dragonstone in his own right. May the Seven, and the old gods if they must, witness it." The hall did not know how to sound. Some men made a noise and then swallowed it. Some turned to see the queen's reaction because they had no idea what else to do. The queen smiled, and it was like the first thin ice across a stream. Beautiful if you were very far away from it. Jon forgot to breathe, and then remembered and did it badly. He was on his feet without remembering standing, and the weight of 100 eyes turned his skin to glass. Ghost lifted his head and made a low sound that was not a growl and not anything else Jon had heard before. He might have looked to Ned, but he found he could not. His gaze, treacherous, went to the king instead, and what he saw there was not mischief or wine but a steadiness so strange on Robert's face it made Jon step backward. Catelyn's lips had tightened so hard the color bled from them. Sansa stared at Jon as if her own betrothal had been announced and she could not decide whether to be pleased. Arya's mouth had fallen open. Robb's chair scraped as he pushed himself half to standing, then caught himself because he had not been called. Bran leaned so far forward Maester Luwin put a hand on the boy's sleeve. Rickon began to cry without knowing why he was crying, and Shaggy Dog snarled joyfully at the noise. "Come, boy," Robert said, and though the king's voice was easy, it was not a request. "Let us see if Dragonstone will suit a wolf." He put the cup aside and reached for a chain. It had been laid beneath the dais with a care too deliberate to be accident. Cersei's gaze was a blade drawn and laid on the table's edge. Jaime's fingers drummed a silent rhythm that might have been amusement or warning. Tyrion had climbed onto the bench and was leaning forward, eyes alight. Ned did not move to intercede. Jon read that stillness again and understood what a boy does not often understand. That sometimes a father had to hold still to keep the world from shaking apart. He walked because the king had told him to. He walked because he had lived long enough beneath Winterfell's laws not to shame them now. His legs were wood for 3 paces and then they were his again. The chain's medallion was wrought in the shape of a 3-headed dragon twisted upon itself until it seemed to be devouring its own tail, and that made sense to Jon in a way he could not explain. The links were black iron warmed by firelight. They were heavy on his neck when Robert set them there. The king's hand came to rest on Jon's shoulder for the space of a heartbeat. Jon felt the weight of that hand the way men feel weather set in for a season. The room exhaled when the king let go. Cersei raised her cup and drank wine that had gone dark as garnet. Jaime kept time with his fingers on the table and very nearly smiled. "Wards are taken to keep peace among houses," Robert said, suddenly a man telling men how the world worked. "The boy will come south with me, learn courts and councils, learn to ride where the roads aren't made of ice. Ned will come too, so there will be no crying I've stolen his whelp. The North and Crown will be nearer than they have been since the snows." "It is well done." "It is done," Cersei said, and that was all. That night Winterfell wore 2 sleeps. One fitful and full of whispered talk, one heavy as snow on a pine bough. Jon did not sleep at all. Ghost lay pressed along his side. The wolf's slow breaths were a sea on which Jon's thoughts drifted and crashed. He tried to understand what had happened and failed. He tried to find what he felt and found too many things at once. He went, because he always did, to the one place in Winterfell that had never asked him to be anything but himself. The gods would held the night the way a hand holds a bird. Careful, contained, not harsh. The weirwood's leaves whispered of summer that might someday come. Jon knelt beside the black pool and watched his face tremble in it. The chain the king had put there felt as if it did not belong to the reflection at all, as if someone had thrown a foreign coin into the water. "She's not pleased," Arya said, and Jon did not start because she walked like herself with no idea how to creep. She perched on a root and hunched her shoulders into her cloak as if daring the cold to push her. "Mother." "No," Jon said. "You didn't ask for it." "No," Jon said again. "She looked like she'd swallowed a stone," Arya said with a savage relish that made her sound like a different girl and exactly herself. "Sansa thinks it's romantic." Jon almost laughed and did not. "Romantic? Kings and princes and old names," Arya said, rolling her eyes. "She'll make a tale of it until it breaks if she isn't careful." "Are you going to be a prince, Jon?" She spat in the pool, delicate as a cat might swat a ribbon, as if to prove she had no reverence for water that pretended to be holy. "I am what I am," Jon said. "Whatever they call it." "What do they call you?" He touched the medallion, feeling the dragon's heads, feeling the iron's stubbornness. "They call me Snow," he said softly. "This is a thing a king said over supper." Arya made a small, fierce noise that might have meant she understood. "If you have to go south, you'll take me in your pocket, won't you? I could be your shadow. I'm very good at being nobody. You're the worst nobody I've ever met." He stretched out a hand and ruffled her hair. She ducked, then leaned into it for a heartbeat and away. "Go to bed, little sister. Father won't tell me what he thinks," Arya said, not moving. "He has that look. You know the look. Robb says it's the look he had when he told Theon he'd keep him here. I think it's the look he has when he's holding the whole world in his teeth and won't let it cut him." Jon shut his eyes. "He will go south. Because of you? Because of the king. Jon said, which was also true. Because of what he is. When Arya had gone, the gods would gathered itself back up and held him. Jon whispered to the weirwood what he could not say aloud. That he did not know what he was to be, that he had always believed his path was narrow. Take the black, be a sword, belong somewhere that asked not who you were born to be but what you swore. The new thing in him hurt the old thing. Ghost laid his muzzle on Jon's knee and breathed out. Ned came to him with the sky turned to iron at the horizon. He came quietly enough that even Ghost did not lift his head. He stood looking at his son for a time long enough that the pool grew a skin of thin ice at its edge. I never asked him for this. Jon's voice surprised him. It was steadier than he felt. I know, Ned said. Then why? Jon asked and could not finish it. He did not know if he was asking about kings or fathers or gods. Robert has always made his choices the way a boar runs, Ned said. Because he wants it. Because it is before him. Because some old hurt aches in him and he thinks this will take the ache away. He put a hand to Jon's shoulder, as the king had, but it weighed entirely differently. You do not have to go. If you take the black, his decree will not bind you. Jon laughed, and it sounded like the first chip from an ice block. And be a prince of the Night's Watch? Boys have sworn for less reason, Ned said, and his mouth crimped at the edge. But it would put you beyond his reach. What do you want? Ned's fingers tightened, barely. I want you safe. He drew a breath. And I want you to be what you are. It is a hard thing to be a Stark when men call you by another name. It is a hard thing to be a Snow when a king calls you by his. I can give you only what I have always given you. My name in my heart, my counsel, and my love. He let his hand fall. The king will not be turned. If you go south, I will go his hand, and I will see you taught in all the things a Stark boy must know if he is to live among men who think honor a garment you shrug on when cold and cast off when you are warm again. Mother, Jon said, and that was when his voice failed him. He had never called Catelyn by that word to her face, and he did not now, but the word itself felt treacherous in his mouth. She wants her children safe too, Ned said quietly, and she is afraid in a way I have given her cause to be. That is the truth of it. And yet, he looked at the weirwood, not at Jon. Once I knelt where you kneel, and a woman's blood steamed upon the stone. And I made a choice to keep a child alive and a king's wrath from burning a world I had not yet learned how to live in. Do I regret it? I regret 1,000 things. But not you. Jon turned his face away because the cold made his eyes sting suddenly, and because he was 18 and had taught himself not to weep in front of the man he most wanted to be like. I am no son of a king. You are my son, Ned said, and it was both true and not all the truth, and it was enough for now. The morning after the feast, Bran fell. Winterfell woke to a cry like a hawk struck in the air. Men came running, and women covered their mouths. Jon reached the base of the tower to see Bran carried down a stair like a broken doll. And the world shrank until there was only his brother's hair against his arm and the scant weight of him in their hands. The king's men jostled back. The queen drew her children close and murmured something to Joffrey that made him smirk and then smooth it away. Jaime Lannister stood very still. Tyrion looked almost tender. Catelyn's scream came late and went on too long. Robert swore with a soldier's short ferocity and clapped Ned hard on the back when Ned's lips thinned. He'll mend, the king said. He's a wolf. Wolves mend. He did not know Bran. Jon did. The boy had climbed everything that could be climbed and some things that could not. Jon sat at Bran's bedside in the hours no one knew what to do with and told ghost stories to a boy who could not hear them. He told them to himself. He told them to keep from hearing Catelyn's breath when she came and sat stiff and angry as a spear. When she told him to leave, he left. When she told him not to touch Bran, he did not touch him. When she stopped telling him anything at all and simply stared at him, he could not make himself smile to show her he was harmless. He could not go back to the Godswood because the gods might have been listening last night and given him what he did not know how to refuse. Everything turned as if pushed by a gloved hand. Robert drank deeper, and the queen's smiles grew thinner and brighter. Jaime rode out alone and returned speckled with mud that looked very much like blood. Tyrion saddled a horse with the same care a small man gives to tasks a large man takes for granted. He said he would go to the wall to piss off it, and grinned at Jon in the yard as if they shared a joke. "A prince," Tyrion said thoughtfully. "Perhaps when you come south we will see if the throne is more comfortable than the wall in winter." "Thrones are for kings," Jon said, and Tyrion's grin went sly. "And princes are for queens," he murmured. "Beware of them." The day they left Winterfell, the sky lowered until it could have been the lid on a casket. The king's train coiled itself like a brightly dressed serpent and began to move. Catelyn did not come to the yard. She had kissed Robb's hair and Sansa's and Arya's, and had no kisses left for Jon, even had she wanted to give him one. She looked at him through Bran's door once as if he were a thing falling from a great height. He tried to bow and made a poor work of it. Ned put his hand on Jon's back and guided him down the stairs and out into the cold. The direwolves followed, red eyes and gray eyes and green gold. Arya climbed into the cart with her needle and glared at the world. Sansa thanked everyone with the grace of a lady and was thanked back. Joffrey looked pleased to have a Stark girl in his shadow. Theon grinned as if someone else's fortune always amused him. Benjen Stark spoke to Jon quietly for a moment about the watch. He said the words without insistence. Jon would have gone with him yesterday. Today there was a weight on his neck and a king's word like a seal on wax. Kingsroad miles have their own measure. The world slid past with a sound like a long breath. Robert laughed and complained by turns. He hunted. He boasted. He spoke of justs with too much joy for a man pretending to be ashamed of enjoying them. He bellowed while they broke camp and napped while others did the work. Jon watched him and watched the men who watched him and learned more than he could have from any maester's book. A king, he thought, was a thing other men carried. The weight of him broke their backs or made them stronger. It depended on who the men were. Ned carried him with a stillness that had nothing to do with rest. Renly laughed at his king brother's jests and made better ones. As for the queen, she did not carry Robert at all. She walked beside him and cut him with her eyes. Joffrey learned from her. On the green bank of a shallow river, everything that had been trembling became a thing that fell. The Prince of the Realm and the Prince of Dragonstone, if that were what he was, found their feet near one another by the water. Arya was there as she always found the places she wanted to be. Not because anyone took her, but because they forgot to forbid her. She practiced with a stick, ferocious, and Jon let her be. He had gone to set Ghost running. He had gone to be away from the tent where Cersei's women were plaiting Sansa's hair to outshine a summer she might never see again in the north. Joffrey had a sword that had never done more than break bread, and drink in him enough to make him brave in the way wine makes boys brave. He mocked in a high, clear voice that the river carried back to him. He mocked the way Arya swung the stick and called for her to show him how it felt on his own arm. Jon had begun to move when the butcher's boy came up from the village with his own stick and his own grin and a scared, stupid gallantry that made Jon's heart ache. The rest had happened so quickly and so predictably Jon felt when it was over that he had dreamed it before. Joffrey had cut the boy without thought. Arya had batted at the sword as if it were a hornet. Nymeria had sunk her teeth into the prince's soft wrist because a wolf sees threat and answers it. By the time Jon reached them, Joffrey was shrieking over his own blood and calling for his mother and swearing vengeance on children and beasts and anyone who looked at him. Jon struck his sword from his hand with the flat of Longclaw and said in a voice he did not know he possessed, "Enough." Joffrey quieted himself with an effort you could see because the effort was not something he had practice with. He stared at Jon's sword and then at Jon's face and said with a small delight, "Do bastards carry Valyrian steel now? Or is that part of your new style?" Arya had gone white, Nymeria's hackles bristling. Sansa stood in the path as if thrown there, hands to her mouth, eyes horrified not by the blood but by the ruin of the afternoon she had made for herself. The butcher's boy clutched his shoulder. He would live if someone bound it. "Go," Jon told Arya, without looking at her. "Take her. Run." He could feel the queen's men arriving like weather. He spoke in a low voice Joffrey would not have to strain to hear. If your blade was keen, Prince, you would have killed him without making that face. You would not look surprised by your own cut. You struck me, Joffrey said, holding up his wrist for the witnesses the world always gave him. A wolf struck the blood of the king. A dog put a thorn in your paw, Jon said. And then the queen was there and the quarrel piled like logs on a fire. Cersei made a petty thing great by the force of her fury. She made it court. She looked at Jon's sword, at the boy with blood on him, at Arya vanished like a stone dropped into a well, and she made of all of it a story with a single ending. Robert made a rough attempt at mercy and then folded, as he had folded before when the queen put her hands to the edges of his temper and tore it neatly. The butcher's boy was run down by the hound despite Jon's order to his men to find the child first. It had been a long time since the hound took orders from men like Jon. Nymeria was gone. The queen would not have a tail without a wolf's head in it. Lady lay quiet as Sansa held her. Sansa said she had done nothing. She said it in that new soft southern way she had learned, but her eyes begged Jon as she had begged Joffrey earlier to look at her. Jon knelt because he was the only man in reach who should do it if it must be done. Robert would not, and Ned should not. He stroked Lady's ears while the wolf breathed and blinked as if she knew this was a thing a prince might have to do. He killed her with a blade that felt heavier than any he had ever held and cleaned the steel after with care so steady it might have surprised a better man. Sansa made a sound Jon would dream of later, and Arya came crawling out of her grief like something that meant to live. That night the king drank until his words lost their ends, and Cersei drank until hers lost their beginning. When Jon went to his tent, Ghost curled tight around his legs and made the terrible night a little smaller. Ned came and sat on the chest and did not speak for a long time. "You should not have done it," he said at last. Jon swallowed. "Who else?" "That is the curse," Ned said. "Who else?" The Red Keep stank of heat and men and time. Its stones were the color of old blood, and so were its habits. The small council chamber held a bowl of fruit that was always slightly overripe. Littlefinger winked as easily as he breathed. Varys sat like a comfortable cat on his cushions and called news little birds. So often Jon began to wonder if the man thought himself a saint in a garden. Renly smelled of soap and wore the king's temper as if it were only another of his brother's old tunics to be passed down. Grand Maester Pycelle had a beard to hide his thoughts in. Barristan Selmy was the only thing in the Red Keep that seemed exactly itself. Prince of Dragonstone, Varys purred at their first meeting, and Jon could find no purchase in the smile. Such an antique flavor, so rich. "It was the king's word," Jon said, because that was a rock nothing could pry up from under his foot. "Like a great many things," Varys said mildly. "He wears his words and throws them off again for new ones. How fresh you are. How very winter." Stannis did not come to court to be told he had been unseated on his island. He sent letters that smelled of salt and scorn and the law. They arrived like crows and were opened like wounds. Robert read them, laughed, ignored them, growled, ignored them, and at last drank with such determination he might have been trying to drown the letters in his belly. "Stannis will not forgive this," Renly said cheerfully, slicing a pear with a dagger in long, thin crescents that never broke. "But then Stannis does not forgive anything." "Lord Stannis is the king's brother," Jon said, because it still astonished him how often men at court spoke of kin as of horses in a sale. "And you," Renly said, amused, "are his son by law one day out of Winterfell. You will learn that blood binds and blood burns. Try not to confuse which is happening at any given moment." Littlefinger smiled at Jon like a man at a dog he is training tricks for. "A prince needs a purse and friends, my sweet, and the memory of knights is made of gold like the king's landing sky. Fragile, flattering, and cheap. I am your friend when you need coin and a harmless man when you do not. Keep me that way." Jon did not know yet how to answer a man who insulted himself for the sake of insulting another. He kept his hands light on the cup and his eyes on the table. Barristan spoke to him in the yard and called him Prince, with a tone that suggested the title was something Jon had put on and might put off when it stained. "Your grip is sound," Selmy said after pushing Jon until his arm shook. Your patience is better. Remember, most men lose with their mouths before they lose with their steel. They tell you how they will come. They show you how they hope to be perceived. Be who you are without telling anyone. It spares you from being wrong and from being right in the wrong company. Jon looked to the arch where Sandor Clegane leaned, mouth twisted, eyes like a battering ram. And if you must tell them? Lie, Selmy said. So gently Jon laughed against his will. The days in King's Landing had two textures. The mornings were drills and the afternoons lessons with maesters who sniffed at a boy who had not been raised for court like a hound that was very eager and not very purebred. Nights were feasts when there were feasts and strong wine and talk when there were not. Jon learned to be still at the small council table when Ned needed stillness at his back. He learned to listen to the sound coffers make when men talk of them. He learned the names of ships as if they were men, and of men as if they were storms. He learned that the city watch could be bought for less than a princess's dowry, and that the kitchens were a better place to hear truth than the throne room. He watched Sansa try to be happy with the shape of her days and Arya try not to die of the shape of hers. He watched Joffrey be taught nothing, and he watched Tommen be taught by everyone. Robert hunted. He hunted to avoid counsel and to avoid Cersei and to avoid the heavy letters from Stannis that said words like precedent and lineage and unsullied law. He hunted to avoid what Ned put on his table when Ned began his quiet walking among ledger books and bastards. Jon did not know yet what the book meant. The dull book of brown pages Ned carried as if it were a blade. The throne room was a theater. Jon learned that when he stood in it for the first time with his father, with the king half asleep on iron and the queen alert at his elbow. He learned it again when he was sent to speak to Ser Barristan and found the old man cutting the food on his plate as carefully as if it were a battlefield. He learned it a third time when Littlefinger arranged for him to lose a purse and find a friend, and did both so elegantly Jon admired the man even as he distrusted him with a thoroughness that felt like cleanliness in a dirty place. And then the king went hunting and did not return well. The boar had taken him under the ribs, or the wine had. The tusk or his own laughter. The gods or his neglect. Robert lay in his great bed with the tapestries pulled like witnesses around him and stank of sweet rot and blood. Jon stood with Ned at the foot of that bed and felt the floor slant. Men came and went, ministers and maesters and a queen without tears. And the only word Jon remembered of that day was the word Robert said when his eyes found Jon and fixed there with a clarity they had not had for a long time. Lyanna, the king said, and then, perhaps only to Ned and perhaps to himself, he has her eyes. Jon wanted then to be 11 again and behind the kitchens with a wooden sword and a certainty about his life that turned out to be a shape cut in frost. He did not move. Ned stood as if he had been carved. Robert pushed himself up on the pillows and swore. He laughed and groaned. He called for wine and then for paper. When he spoke to Jon, he did it without the name that cut or lifted. He did it as if he were speaking to a young man he had offended and wanted to make right with. "You're a good boy," Robert said. "You listen. Your father looks at you like a man looks at a blade he made himself. I should have done it better, all of it. I should have. You know how men speak when they are dying? We tell the truth and think it matters. I think it does. Maybe." He took Jon's rough hand in both his own and gripped until Jon wanted to pull away. "You are my ward. I put my name on you in a room with a woman's ghost looking down her stone nose. If you were mine by blood, I'd have made a better meal of it. I am a poor father to my own boy, but I will not be poorer to you."
"Ned."
Ned stepped forward. His eyes were not wet. "I am here, right?" Robert commanded, and it was the last command he gave that sounded purely like one. "This is the thing. The style, what do we call him? Prince? No, write it like this. Upon my death I name my rightful heir." He stumbled there, and Ned did not help him past it. "To be protector until the heir comes of age. Eddard will do the protecting. The boy will not be unguarded. He has Dragonstone. He will need more than stone to live in this nest." Ned wrote, the quill making slow, dry sounds. Cersei watched the quill as if it were a dagger. Renly stared at the floor. Varys had found a shadow to lean against in which he could be everywhere. Littlefinger was not in the room, and that mattered in a way Jon would only later be able to name. Barristan held the ink. The room smelled of dyeing and ink and calculation. Jon stood until his knees hurt. Robert pressed his signet into the wax with a savage little noise, and then the strength went out of him as if someone had undone a buckle. He lay back and breathed like a man digging himself out of snow. "I hunted too hard," he said, and managed a terrible grin that had the shape of his old grin. "Tell me I died like a king, Stark." "You died as you lived," Ned said. "Badly?" Robert croaked a laugh. He closed his eyes. "I want Rhaegar's children to stay dead. I want mine to live." Whatever else he said was to Lyanna again, and maybe to Ned, and maybe to a god who had never listened to Robert Baratheon while he breathed red air. He stopped in the middle of a sentence and did not start again. In the first hours after Robert's death, the Red Keep showed itself. The small council became a set of teeth. The city watch breathed the way dogs breathe when they scent meat. Janos Slynt smiled too much. The queen wore mourning as if it were silk and did not weep. She asked for the letter, and when she had it, she read it, and when she had read it, she smiled at Ned as if he were a child who had made her a drawing she might hang on a wall until she threw it away. She tore the king's words in two and let the pieces fall to the floor as if she were dropping a handkerchief. "You forget your place," she told Ned in a voice so sweet it would have rotted if you left it in the sun. "You forget all of our places. The throne does not belong to old debts or old loves or old names. It belongs to my son." "The throne belongs to Robert's heir," Ned said, holding his stillness as if it weighed as much as a man. He did not look to Jon. "You know as well as I do that the boy you have made heir is not the king's." Cersei's eyes did not flicker. "You will not say that again in this room," she said, and the men who had bought the city watch moved their hands to their swords. Jon had been told to keep out of it. He had meant to. He had meant to be stone, to let Ned be his voice and hand. He did not move when the gold cloaks came in at Littlefinger's gesture and the room turned. He did not move when men drew and men fell. He did not move until he saw Jory Castle take a blade under his ribs and go down with the expression of a man who has just understood something. He did not move until Janos Slynt's mouth made an O of surprise when his own men did as he told them to instead of as he had told Ned they would. He moved then. Barristan Selmy had his sword in his hand and a grief on his face Jon had not seen there. The old man fought like history. Jon put himself back to back with him and felt the knowledge flood him of how it is when steel kisses steel and you either keep your feet or you do not. Ned shouted something he could not hear. The world narrowed again. Ghost came from nowhere and everywhere at once. A white bolt in a room of red stone. He went for the man who had his sword raised over Ned, and the man went down. Ghost's jaws were red at once. "Take the boy," Varys hissed at someone Jon could not see. "Take him. Take him. Odu, move your feet." The throne watched with its iron eyes. In that room of treachery, men made what they were. Littlefinger showed his hand at last, and it was holding a knife. Renly disappeared like a candle pinched between fingers. Pycelle wrung his beard. The queen stood like a statue of malice. The boy king stepped onto a dais made of his father's death and looked at the blood as if it were a crimson carpet. "Seize them all," Joffrey commanded, and his voice was that of a child who thinks commands make themselves obeyed. They seized enough. They seized Ned. They seized men of the north. Ghost vanished when Jon told him to vanish, and Ghost obeyed him and was gone into the bowels of the keep with a speed that made the room look slow. Varys someone turned out to be Syrio Farrell's friend in a brown cloak who never gave Jon his name. He pulled at Jon's arm with a grip that had no flesh in it. "Fool," the man whispered. "You are alive. Be content with that." "I won't leave my father," Jon said and tried to cut his arm free. Barristan's blade flashed, and Selmy fell back a step, bleeding and astonished. "You cannot save him here," the stranger said. "You can save him later, or his daughter, or your north. Or you can die where the golden men want you to die and let the queen have her way with every part of you. Move." Jon moved. He told himself it was to save a later day. He told himself he could do more alive. He told himself the words that keep men from drowning. He slipped into a corridor that smelled of damp and rats and ran with Ghost's absence like a hunger inside him. The brown-cloaked man led him through kitchens and down stairwells hidden behind tapestries. And in one of those stairwells, Arya's small face flashed out of darkness and then was gone. Syrio Farrell's wooden sword clattered on stone someplace, and men swore, and Jon could not go there. He could not go anywhere but after the man whose hand had hold of his sleeve as if it were time itself. They spat him out into a night the color of ink and into Davos Seaworth's hands. Davos was there because Stannis' letter had come not only with scorn but with a ship. He had never seen Jon, but a smuggler knows goods by the feel of them, and Davos knew a charge when someone put one into his hold. "You are the prince," Davos said, half in disbelief and half in resignation. He had the smell of the sea on him. He looked at Jon as if he were cargo and as if he were his own son. "Get him below, lads. All the gold cloaks in the world cannot find a boy in a true fog." The Blackwater lapped at the hull and made a sound like a tired man muttering. King's Landing shimmered under a sky without stars. The ship slid out like a thief. Jon stood at the stern for as long as he dared and watched the red keep sit on its hill like a scab on a wound. He made himself look away. The sea had its own air. Dragonstone rose out of it like the back of something great and sleeping. Its gargoyles crouched and leered as if they had waited since Aegon for something to fly again. Stannis stood on the steps, rigid as his own jaw, and Melisandre was at his right hand like fire given a shape. She had red hair that made men think of blood and a presence that made them think of the things blood belongs to. "This is the boy," Stannis said, and his voice held no surprise at all, only disapproval. "My king brother's foolishness made meat. My lord of onions, you have risked much." "I have," Davos said, "and I have known better trades. Your grace," he added, and the addressee was not quite Stannis. "He wears the king's chain. It is iron," Stannis said, as if iron offended him because he needed it and it seldom liked him back. "You are Jon Snow." "I am Jon," Jon said. He thought of adding more and did not. He had learned that much. Melisandre warmed her hands at the sun as if it were a brazier. She watched Jon with an attention that made Ghost's hackles lift even though Ghost was not there. "He has a name in him," she said in a tone that suggested the name itself might have been a coal she could hold and weigh. "A bright name, burned into flesh." "What nonsense," Stannis said, not bothering to lower his voice. "You read coal the way fools read entrails. I have no time for wizards, red or black. You had time to save a boy the realm has been told is a prince," Melisandre said, as if it were nothing to tug on a king's brother's temper. "I had time to save a piece on the board," Stannis corrected, and then looked at Jon as if he might have to be plain to fit. "My brother named you to Dragonstone. He named me to Storm's End and then made my work a byword. He has died of his appetites. The law remains. The law says the king's sons inherit. He left none. The law says the next brother." He sneered at the idea of nextness. "Where's the crown?" "He wrote that Lord Eddard would be protector," Jon said. "He wrote my name in no place but the one he had already made for me." Stannis' mouth twitched and made a line of irritation where other men had an expression. "You speak plainly. Good. You will need it. The Lannisters will have raised their lion over the Red Keep. The North will gather. Your father will." For once, Stannis hesitated, and Jon knew then that Stannis had heard, but not what. "We will write to him," he wrote. The letter that went north was as lean as a hound. It said the law was this and the truth was that, and that men who had eyes should use them and swords also. It said the boy was safe. It said that a wolf had a den now in stone that dragons had once heated with their breath. In Dragonstone, Jon learned ships as he had learned swords. He learned the smell of pitch and the sound of a hull creaking contentedly, and the way men who had been loyal to Stannis since before Jon had been born treated him like both a lordling and a piece of flotsam until they decided he was not about to be offended by anything so small as their opinion of him. Davos taught him knots. "Because you do not trust a rope someone else ties for you," Davos said, and grinned when Jon did it wrong and showed him how to do it again. "When we move on King's Landing," Stannis said one night in the map room whose windows held back the wind with a stubbornness Jon respected, "we will not have the city's love. The city loves who feeds it and who amuses it. Robert fed it with feasts and roared at it when it tried to bring him to heel. Joffrey will amuse it until he frightens it. Then it will tear him or feed him or both. We will not amuse it at all. We will simply do what is right." "The right often starves," Davos said softly. "The right stands," Stannis snapped. "If it falls, it stands again." "He means to take your chain from you," Melisandre murmured to Jon when Stannis left the room, her voice a velvet thing with a bite. "He means to let you keep Dragonstone and your life because he cannot afford to throw away a piece he might need. He will ask you to kneel and to call him what he calls himself when he thinks of himself in the dark." "What do you call him?" Jon asked. "Useful," she purred. "As fire is useful. As blood is useful." "Do not talk of the boy's blood," Davos said, and there was steel in him when he said it. "He is no sacrifice for your god." "I only said it was useful," Melisandre murmured, amused at how men show their loyalties by yelping. She looked Jon over as if testing whether he fit a prophecy hung in a closet for too many years. "You smell of snow and of a crown. It is a strange scent. Men came and men went. Letters arrived that were not letters. One from Renly with a green softness and a steel underneath. One from Robb Stark that held more sorrow than most boys' words should be asked to carry. One from Catelyn that did not come at all. From the north came news in bits. Robb had called the banners. The Riverlords were moving. The Lannisters were burning their way through the Riverlands like a sickness with a banner. From King's Landing came smoke and the sound of childish proclamations. From across the narrow sea there came a whisper that the last dragons had quickened. But men laughed at that until some stopped laughing and wondered if the sound they heard was a song or a storm. Jon slept poorly and woke to work. When he dreamed of a woman with wild black hair and eyes that looked like his own turned inward and made brighter by pain. He dreamed he climbed a tower and found a bed and a pool of blood and a promise that had the shape of a winter rose and a man's face he knew and did not know. He did not speak of his dreams to anyone. He wrote to Arya and Sansa and Robb and said nothing that would doom any of them if the letters were opened. He wrote once to his father and burned the letter after reading it back to himself because there were too many things in it that did not know how to be ink. He went down to the armory and beat at a post until his arms trembled. He told himself that men did not live and die by dreams. When Stannis asked him to kneel, Jon did because it was the law and because of what he had learned since leaving Winterfell about boards and pieces and the order in which men should do things to avoid making more bodies than necessary. He said the words without feeling they undid anything in him. Words did not always undo things. Some words made them. "Your Grace," he said, looking into Stannis' face, and thought of Ned at the hearth last winter saying law was a fence that kept men from tearing each other apart without end. "The king is dead. The law says the brother. The law says the truth," Stannis corrected harshly. "And the truth says the Lannisters lie even when they sleep. We will take King's Landing. We will take the North's friendship without asking for it on our knees. We will take what belongs to us. You will hold Dragonstone in my name and wear whatever name my brother threw at you when it suits us to let you wear it. Is that plain enough for winter ears?" "It is plain enough," Jon said. "And this," Stannis said, not yet done. "You will not forget. You are a Stark. Do not let my brother's frivolity make a pretender of you. When you write to your father..." He stumbled without meaning to and made the word sound difficult. "Tell him that." Jon did not say he wrote and burned. He did not say the word father was a better name than any king or prince had given him. He only bowed, and when Melisandre smiled, he met her gaze and did not look away until she looked first. A raven brought a letter with a broken seal and words that stank of smoke. Sansa wrote with a hand that shook on the page. She begged for mercy. She begged for her father's life. She begged a boy, not a prince, if he were in the city, to speak for her. Jon's hands shook and then were still. He wanted to be there and he was not. He wanted to kill a boy and he could not. He wanted to save a man who had saved him 1,000 times with a single steady look. He set his jaw and went to Stannis. "If we move now," he said, "we might do more than feed our ships to wildfire in a green river." Stannis was not a man to be flattered into haste. He stared at the letter and at Jon and at the map. He tapped 2 fingers where the Blackwater Bay looked like a tongue. "We will lose more men than we save if we go to them before we are ready. And if we wait," Jon said evenly, "the Queen will make of my father an example. She will make of him a lesson to boys who think honor can be beaten onto other men's backs. She will do it because she wants to show how she loved a son from a father she hates." "So," Stannis said, and his own mouth set, "you have thought about it. Good. It means you will not break when it happens." "It will not happen," Jon said, "because men sometimes speak the words they could live inside if they say them aloud enough times. I will not let it." Melisandre laughed then, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. "You will learn," she said, "how much blood you cannot keep inside bodies you love." He went out to the bailey and put his hand to a gargoyle's snout and asked himself if he would trade all the old names for a single life. He would have. That was the worst and the best of him. Ghost came out of a shadow, as he always had, and leaned into him with a weight that felt like inevitability. Word came to Dragonstone as word comes when it is meant to cut and then cauterize. Came on a gray day with a gray sea, and Jon thought afterward that of course it had. Eddard Stark knelt on Baelor's steps and confessed to crimes he had not committed and declared a boy a king he did not recognize. And then a child who had been given a crown and not an education ordered the man's head to be struck off. It was done by a headsman who had kept blades for feast days and for these. It was done in the sight of Sansa and the city and the gods who do not intervene except when men give them swords. Jon did not hear the end of the letter. He heard the sound a sword makes when it leaves its scabbard. He did not know until later that the sound had come from his own hand. Davos put a hand on his wrist. Stannis put a word in his path. Melisandre put her eyes on his face. None of it mattered for a while. The room moved around him like water around a stone. Ghost made a noise he had not made since Winterfell, and then was silent. When Jon came back to himself, he was on the parapet with the wind like knives on his face and Stannis at his shoulder like a better sort of knife. They did not speak for a long time. A ship came in, a small one with a tired flag. The sea went about its business. "When my brother took Storm's End," Stannis said at last, "they sang of his hammer. They do not sing of men who held the castle when it had no food. They do not sing of how I did not break or of the Onion Knight who brought us food and saved me from eating a shoe. They sing about hammers and thunder and hair. I did what needed doing. That is the work of a king." Jon stared out over the water. "And of a son?" Stannis' jaw tightened. "Your father kept the law when we were boys. He broke it when he took you in and called you his. He made a better law between 2 men that day than the one the realm holds to. In the end, it got his head taken off." Jon's hands were on the stone. He could feel how old it was. He wondered how many men had bled into Dragonstone and how many of them had been kept from falling by a law or a love or a foolish hope. "I will kill the boy who did it." "No," Stannis said, so flat Jon turned. "You will kill the men who put the sword in the boy's hand and the words in his mouth, if you can. But first you will make yourself stronger. You will not run at a wall because you want it down. Robert did that and men loved him for it and died. I do not require love. I require victory. Do you require me?" Jon asked, surprised at himself for the asking. Stannis looked at him as if he were a ledger whose numbers had to add. "I require Dragonstone held. I require the North not to set a crown on a boy's head because he has a name like yours in his mouth and a hurt like yours in his heart." "They have named Robb king in the North," Jon said, not asking. He felt the truth of it like a bruise. "They will," Stannis said. "Men with full bellies and empty heads like to say such things around hearths. Tastes good. It goes down easily. It makes bad soldiers. The Lannisters want them to do it. It keeps them fighting the South while the South eats them piece by piece. Robb is not a fool." Jon's voice sharpened. "He is a boy," Stannis said bluntly. So are you. Neither of you need be fools. Do not make me think I have warmed a viper at my hearth. Later in the night, Melisandre came to the chapel that the Targaryens had made into a place for their own old gods and the new set they'd needed to keep the knobs of Westeros turning. She lit a brazier and made the flames stand taller than they should. Jon watched them and felt their heat and thought about the cold. He did not believe in her god. He believed in the heat. There is a story, she said conversationally, about a prince who was promised to the world and who would wake dragons and forge a sword of fire and all the things men like to put in stories when the world frightens them. They argue about whether it is a man or a woman who will be this promised one. They argue about the color of his hair and whether his mother ate peppers while she carried him. It is all very charming. The story itself is a net. The thing it catches is not what the men who cast it imagine. You are a prince by word. You are a prince by blood. Your blood remembers something that would burn most men to take in their mouths. Do not be ashamed of that. Use it. Jon stared into the fire until it made his eyes feel scraped raw. If I am what you say, why do I feel only like a boy who could not keep a man from dying? Because that, Melisandre said, smiling slightly, is what men are, even when gods breathe on their hair. War cracked the world into plates and pushed them against each other until sparks flew. The north called its banners and went south under a dire wolf. The river lords bled. The westerlands burned but roared while they burned. The Reach watched with a greedy eye. The Vale did not move because the Vale preferred to pretend there was no world beyond the high white walls of its air. Renly crowned himself king and put a stag's antlers in gold upon his head and made a summer camp so fine men mistook it for a court. Stannis gathered ships and numbers and cold men with good swords. King's Landing crouched and licked its teeth and sent messengers who did not return. From Dragonstone, Jon wrote letters with Davos' honest eyes on him and Stannis' law behind him and Melisandre's fire at his ear, and his father's voice kept where no one could hear it. He wrote to Robb, and it was the hardest thing he'd done since the day they had set Lady's limp body on a bier. He wrote like a man who has something to trade and not enough to trade it with. He did not speak of kings. He spoke of Catelyn the way he had never thought to on a page. He spoke of the Riverlands. He spoke of the law as if it were a thing that could be set over men and keep them from breaking. He spoke of war as if any Stark ever needed lessons in it. Robb's answer came with the smell of horse and wet wool. He wrote like a boy who had not wanted to write at all and had done it because his mother looked at him and said, "Write." He did not call himself king in the letter. He asked if Jon was safe. He asked if he should kill Jaime Lannister. He asked if he should listen to the phrase. He asked if a man could live without a father and not become less. Jon's hand shook on the reply and was steady when it went to the page. He told Robb to be what his father had been without trying to be his father. He told him to see men's faces as well as the banners they stood under. He told him to beware of smiling debts. He did not tell him whether to kill Jaime Lannister because he did not know and did not know anyone who did. He did not tell him about the phrase because there was not enough ink in the world to cover it. He told him to listen. He told him to ask before he decided whether a silence meant assent or treachery. He ended without a sign-off because he could think of no word that said brother and prince and stranger all at once. When at last Stannis put his ships in a line and put fire in their bellies and made for King's Landing like a man who will either break a door or die trying, the world held its breath. Jon stood at the prow beside Davos and watched the city grow from a red smudge to a red wall to a red mouth that did not fear the taste of men. He felt the ship surge and knew that whatever happened, he had left one life and not yet arrived at another. The wildfire under the river was a green dragon that men had hidden in glass. It came up at them as if summoned and burned with a heat that did not feel like any heat Jon had known. It was wrong heat. It was hunger that had learned to dress itself in color. Ships went up like honey on a skillet. Men went up like words on wax. Davos' sun was there and then was not. Davos himself walked out of it with skin like rope and eyes like holes in a sail. Jon survived because luck and because the ship behind his did not. A piece of mast kissed him and went on without taking him with it. Ghost howled in a stone corridor 100 leagues away, and men in Dragonstone turned in their beds with their hearts pounding and did not know why. They pounded at the gate and at the walls and at the Lannisters. They pounded at the wrong things, some of them, and died for it. Joffrey went to the walls and pointed and shouted and turned the battle with his finger only because men who knew what they were doing moved when he moved and made his gesture into something with steel under it. Tyrion saved the city with a trick and a hammer and a scar he would always carry. And if Jon had ever thought little of him, he thought better now when he saw him run into a river of fire to pull men out of it by their collars and joke into the faces of men who had no idea they were alive until he told them so. Stannis fought his way up a ladder and back down it and up again and back down, and at last someone pulled him away bodily because law turns into iron only if someone keeps it from melting in the heat of the world. They did not take the city. They fell back to their ships or to pieces of them. They took their dead with them when they could and let the sea have them when they could not. Jon came back to Dragonstone not victorious and not entirely alive. He bent over the rail with salt in his throat and tried not to remember what men's hair smells like when it burns. Melisandre stood on the quay with a smile like a blade. "It was not the hour," she said. "Fire keeps its own time. What does honor keep?" Jon asked, ragged, and she did not answer. The war went on. Robb won where it mattered and lost where it counted. The Lannisters bled and laughed and married new allies the way some men put on clean shirts. Sansa stayed in a cage with pretty bars. Arya walked out of more cages than Jon could count and kept walking. Catelyn broke something in herself to save her daughters and then saved a man who would undo everything. Renly died because the world's gods liked their sacrifices to look like lovers. Stannis came back from the edge of fire with Melisandre's hand on his arm. On a morning when Dragonstone's gargoyles looked less smug than they usually did, a ship from White Harbor arrived with letters and rumors. The letters said that Balon Greyjoy had found the smell of a weak coast irresistible. The rumors said that Theon had remembered where he came from and forgotten where he had been. The letters said that Robb might be trapped by a thing that looked like honor and was called the Twins. The rumors said that old names were walking and that a crowned bow. Why in the north was making men bend their heads and like it because he looked so much like what they had loved and lost. Jon held the letter with his father's sister's maiden name in it and felt a thing shift in him that might have been a plate of the world brushing the edge of another. He sought Davos because plain men tell truth without trying to make it sound clever. "You cannot save everything," Davos said in his little room with the ship model on the shelf. "Choose what you must save and make sure it is worth your hand." "I cannot save anything," Jon said harshly. "Every time I reach, the thing I reach for moves as if someone pushed it. I am tired of being told to wait and of waiting and of being told that a boy must be patient while the world hangs him by the heels and shakes all the good sense out of his pockets." Davos' eyes wrinkled at the corners not with mirth but with the fatigue of having seen too many storms. "You speak like a man about to make a very fine mistake," he said. "You will get men killed when you make it. The best you can do is make sure the men who die will have died for something that will make other men live." Jon thought of the wall then, unexpectedly. He thought of Benjen disappearing into a white silence. He thought of the dreams that had come to him more often of late, of cold that ate light. "What if the thing worth saving is not what any of you are looking at?" he asked, more to himself than to Davos. "Then you had better look at it," Davos said. Beyond them all, across the narrow sea, a girl with silver hair learned to make a dragon eat raw meat and men kneel and cities open their gates and close them again only with her leave. She was a rumor that grew teeth. Varys birds sang of her in corners. Melisandre tilted her head as if listening to a different song entirely. Stannis set his jaw harder and harder until Jon wondered if it would shatter. The realm did what realms do. It bled in the obvious places and in others no one had thought to bandage. One night, a wind out of the north came down as if it had never left. Jon stood at the highest point of Dragonstone and let it find his face. He could smell snow in it. He could smell pine even here with salt in his lungs. He thought of Robb and of Catelyn and of the Riverlands and of the wall like a line made with a knife on a map. He thought of Ned, whose name he had not said aloud in a month because he had learned that names spoken too often become smaller in the saying. Ghost put his paws up on the parapet and looked with him. "There is more than this," Jon said to the white head beside him. "There is always more than this." He wrote again to Robb, and this time he did not write as a prince. He wrote as a brother. He wrote that he would come north by sea if he could, and by road if he could not, and by paths only wolves knew if he must. He wrote that the South would do what it always did, that it would play at crowns until a winter came that did not care about crowns. He wrote that he meant to put his feet on the wall and his hand on its cold stone and ask it if it remembered him. He wrote that whatever men decided about kings, he had decided something else. Stannis read the letter and grunted. "You will be a poor garrison if you throw yourself at snow," he said, and yet he did not forbid it. Perhaps because he could not. Perhaps because something in him recognized a man's necessity when he saw it, even when it was a boy's. "Take men," Davos said. "Take ships. Do not go alone." "I'm not alone," Jon said, and Ghost's eye gleamed red in the torchlight as if a coal had been placed there by a god who found that sort of thing funny. In the night before Jon sailed, Melisandre came to him with a bowl that smoked as if it were its own small weather. "Look," she said, and showed him flames in which men often claim to see great truths. Jon did not see truth. He saw graspings. He saw a boy with a crown made of ice and tears. He saw a woman with hair like a blade that bit. He saw a man with a hammer made of smoke. He saw a wall and something that pressed its face to it as a child presses a face to glass. He saw his own hands, larger and older than they were, holding a sword that made the air warp around it as heat warps air over stone. "If you look too long," Melisandre said, "you will make the fire say what you want to hear." "What do you want to hear?" Jon asked. "That the night has one end," she said simply. "At dawn." The sea took them with a swell that felt like a breath. Dragonstone's gargoyles watched them go, and Stannis did not. He had maps and men with counting sticks to stare at. Davos had given Jon 4 ships and a captain who did not fear cold because he had once been stuck in ice off Eastwatch for 3 days and had learned to love the taste of boots. They did not fly a stag or a dragon or a wolf. They flew white flags with no device upon them, the better to be ignored. King's Landing lay behind them with all its sharp promises. Ahead, the north. Above, a sky that could not decide if it meant to be generous or true. On deck, Jon watched the way the sunlight tried to make shavings of gold on the water and then gave up. He felt the chain around his neck and the weight on his life and thought for the first time that he could carry both without becoming shaped only by them. He dreamed again that night of a tower and a winter rose and a woman's voice asking him to remember. He woke with Ghost's breath warm on his face and the creak of ropes like an old song. He looked north and the north was there. At White Harbor, Manderley men opened their gates because Stannis' letter said law, because the prince's letter said brother, and because the prince himself bent his head to old men and did not try to outshout them more than necessary. They gave him bread and salt and news and more news until Jon wanted to go to sea again. In the great hall of the new castle, Lord Wyman spoke in a voice like a kettle that had boiled for too long and said that the phrase were a stew no man should crave another bowl of. In the corner of that hall, a bard sang a song about a king in the north and everyone pretended not to listen while listening more keenly than they did to anything else. "Your brother is at the Twins," Wyman said, lowering himself into a chair with a sound that made every joint in Jon's own body ache. "If you can keep yourself from riding there with a sword in your teeth, you may live long enough to save us from our saviors." "I have been told I am to save many things," Jon said dryly. "I will be pleased to save one." The next day, the next rumor came, and rumor is a carrion bird that always knows where to find meat. "The young wolf has broken his bread with the phrase," a fisherman said, and men spat because the phrase bread was said to turn in a man's belly and become knives. "The band plays," a Sellsword laughed, "because men will always find music for their own deaths. They say the old man's daughter's teeth are so sharp she can bite through a promise." Jon stood on the quay with the smell of fish and tar and thought of men who had engineered banquets as vengeance since men had had knives enough and motives plenty. He thought of Catelyn with her hands folded and her eyes open, this time. He thought of Robb, who would never be caught if the world were fair. He thought of a world that was not. "Go," Davos' captain said without waiting to be told, because the sea did not like to be mocked by men's plans. "It's blood in the water, my prince, and sharks have no banners. They went. The sea whipped into them with a glee it never bothered to hide. They clipped hard along the coast, hugging the line where the land bent to let them pass, and men on shore watched them from the high places with telescopes and curiosity, and sometimes shot arrows at the sky as if practice improved a man's mood. They saw war from the outside. A barn smoking, a man with one shoe sitting in a ditch as if he meant to live there now, a horse without a rider and a rider without a horse. And then, a day's sail from the fever, a raven found them, because ravens sometimes do. It landed on the mast as if it had been born there. It looked at Jon and croaked like a hinge. The message on its leg was damp and smelled of the bad kind of wine. He broke the seal and did not read the words at first because he knew what they would be. He read them anyway. That the twins were red, that the songs would never make that red any other color. That Robb had dined and died in the same breath. That Catelyn had died in the cold and then did not in ways men cannot make into letters easily. That Grey Wind had howled and then did not. That the phrase had made of bread a sword and of salt a poison and of the guest right a jest. That the North was a house with its door broken and its neighbors in it. Jon did not make any sound at all for a very long time. Then he said, in the flat, ordinary tone of a man telling another to pass the salt, "Turn us to Eastwatch." The captain looked at him, surprised. "You mean to go to the wall?" "I mean to go where the ground is ours," Jon said, and the words were the first ones that felt entirely true since Robert had put iron around his neck. "I mean to stand where my father would have stood if he had not gone south with me. I mean to put my back to the thing men do not see because they are too busy dying in ways they can write letters about." He sent a letter by Raven that had fewer words than any letter he had ever written. It went to Stannis and it said, "Come north." It went to White Harbor and it said, "Cast out the phrase." It went to the Riverlands and to the Vale and to places where letters go and die. It went like a man's last breath and a first cry. At Eastwatch, the wind sharpened until even Ghost's coat could not make it something other than a blade. The wall reared up like a thing the world had made out of all its cold. It was bigger than Jon had remembered because everything is bigger than boys remember it when they come back as men. He put his gloved hand to it as if to put his hand to his father's heart. It was cold and steady and older than any king. Jeor Mormont had not expected a prince. He had expected fewer men and fewer ships than he needed. He got those and a prince besides. He looked Jon over and looked beyond him and said, "We are running out of men who know how to die well. Try to get me more of them. If you can't, stand where you must stand and don't waste the ones you have. I have brought law and letters and a chain a king put on me to make me heavier," Jon said. "I have brought ships. I have brought men who have fought in the wrong wars and lost and want to feel right when they put steel up again. I have brought a wolf." Mormont grunted. "You've brought yourself," he said. "Don't spend that all in the first hour." That night, Jon walked the top of the wall and felt the blue night lay itself over him like a cloak. He had stood in halls with tapestries that cost more than a winter granary. He had stood in map rooms where kings moved little pieces and made big graves. He had stood at a bed where a man who had once been a king because he had known how to be a friend had died. He had stood in fire and in rooms that smelled of paper. He stood now where the world narrowed to a line a man could not cross without becoming something else. Ghost kept to his shadow as if they were sewn together. Beyond, the forest held its breath in a way that made the hair on Jon's neck stand up. He thought he could smell metal on the air and then thought it was only his own sword. He thought of the promise he had seen in a dream, blue winter roses, not words, and felt his heart pull toward a place he could not name on a map yet. He thought of Robb and of Catelyn and of the way men make of their death's lessons and of their lives' quarrels. He thought of a girl across the sea with dragons and of a man on Dragonstone who would turn and come if the law allowed him a reason to have always wanted to. He thought of a boy in the Red Keep who had put his foot on a step and then into a room and had not come out a boy. Behind him, a foot scraped, deliberate and respectful. "My prince," said Samwell Tarly, and Jon smiled in the dark for the first time in days because here was a kind of man he understood. Frightened, brave, honest, trying. "The Lord Commander asks if you'll take the dawn rounds with him." "I will," Jon said. He put his hand flat against the ice one more time. He did not hear it answer. He did not need it to. The answer was the cold itself, and the cold told him the truth no court ever would. He turned toward the stair and toward men who did not care what a king had called him over a cup, and toward a war that did not announce itself with banners or heralds but with a sound like quiet breaking. He turned with a chain around his neck and a name in his chest and a wolf at his heel, and felt the story of the South lift from him like a skin a snake leaves behind in grass. He would wear it again when he had to, a palimpsest of duty over duty, name over name, but for now, for the first time since the wind had rung Winterfell's banners with a royal arrival, he was only what he had always been. His breath plumed. The wind took it. The watch's horn sounded once, then twice, then a third time from far off, as if the sound had cracked and staggered and found its voice again. Men stopped. Men listened. Men looked at Jon Snow, Prince of Dragonstone, and did not care what the South had done to him. They cared what he would do now. He drew breath and felt it cut and did not flinch. He stepped forward and felt the wall's shadow accept him and did not think that unusual. He was cold and he was alive. He went to meet what came.